All right, well, I think we will get started. It's 2:00. Welcome, everyone. This is the MEFA Institute, and our webinar today is FAFSA Simplification with Financial Aid Experts. And my name is Julie Shields-Rutina. I'm the Director of College Planning, Education, and Training at MEFA. And I'll give a little plug and reminder here that the MEFA Institute is a training program for school counselors and all others who work with students and families. And we have lots of trainings, and we will continue to have lots of trainings. So please visit us often and join in on these webinars. We will especially have even more training on this very topic because it's one with a lot of information. So continue to come back and attend future trainings as well. And know that you can also receive professional development points for attending these trainings, these webinars. And you do that by just, sending in a form that you will receive in a link that you'll receive after the webinar. And you can receive a PDP point for this today. So thank you. A few other logistics. So today, these are your settings. You have control of your audio. We're going to use the Q&A section to receive your questions and answer them and bring them up with the panel. So please, any questions you have, put them in the Q&A and we will be sure to get to them. In fact, we're going to leave a lot of time for questions today because we assume that you probably have a lot. If you need closed captioning, please press the live transcript button and you'll be able to see the words that we're speaking. And if you need to leave, please know that we're recording this session, and tomorrow we will send you some links to both the recording and to the slides we're using for this presentation. So thank you. And with that, I'll be moderating and behind the scenes looking at the questions to be able to pose some of those to the panel, along with my colleague, Sean Morrissey, the Director of College Relations at MEFA, and I'm going to turn it over to Sean right now.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. And I'd also like to thank our presenters today. We have a great group of presenters here that have a whole wealth of experience and knowledge on this topic. And we're very happy to have them with us. And as Julie said earlier, we're going to have a series of trainings on this topic as the summer and fall goes on, because we are learning more information about this topic as the department is doing trainings throughout the summer. They have said that they are going to do a number of trainings, many of them already scheduled for both financial aid administrators, families, and the general public on FAFSA simplification. So we're going to have a lot of great information to share with you as the months go along on this topic, but we're happy that you're here today to learn about what we already know. And so let me introduce our panelists. We have Ken Ferreira, Vice President of Student Financial Services from Franklin Pierce University, Gail Holt, Dean of Financial Aid at Amherst College, Mika Lim, Associate Director of Compliance for Student Financial Services from Northeastern University, and Amy Staffier, Assistant Vice President and Enrollment Student Services and Director of Financial Aid at Simmons University. Thank you all for being here with us.
So I think we're going to have you start it off, Ken.
So thanks for inviting me, Julie and Sean. I appreciate it. And thanks to my colleagues and to all of you for joining us today. This afternoon, we are going to touch base on the FAFSA Simplification Act. That's a tongue twister. Application changes, formula changes, what we need clarification about, and then we'll talk about communications with families and next steps. So let's dig into FAFSA simplification. The overarching umbrella that covers this big change, I think it's the biggest change to federal student aid in over 40 years, is that the FAFSA is becoming easier. And my colleagues are going to dig into that some more today with some more details. But generally speaking, the FAFSA has been a complicated instrument for the 25 years of my career. And this effort is attempting to make it better. And on the whole, I think that what we're seeing thus far, it does. For example, it's going from over 100 questions to around 35, 36 questions. It will, generally speaking, change the way families or students are eligible for federal Pell Grants, tying them more closely to family size and federal poverty guidelines. There are some changes to the financial aid formula that we're going to dig into today, and changes to the application process. Some of you as college counselors might be familiar with what we call right now the IRS data retrieval tool. That's being replaced with something newer and shinier and supposedly easier, so that the parent and the student are linking directly with the IRS, and their data is appearing on the new and improved FAFSA. The only downfall, and we're going to get to that, is it's just a shorter one-way for 1 year. The timeline is a little different for 24-25 than it is and has historically been. But after that 1 year, we'll all be pros and go through this together.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Ken. As Ken said, the transitions can be a little bumpy, and certainly a transition of this magnitude is unfortunately probably won't be the exception. But there's lots of support. There will be, lots of preparation, and we will be able to get through this, most importantly, together from both the financial aid community side as well as the school counselor side, so that we collectively can support our families. Many newer professionals may be used to the October 1st release of the FAFSA. That has not always been the case. But because of this transition, we've been told that in this 1 year only, the FAFSA will be ready before January 1st. So sometime in December, we don't have a date, but the FAFSA will be released in December. Certainly, if that 31 days becomes a little bit more narrow, then that will be shared widely, of course. And so what that means is that certainly a lot of your concerns and students that you work with will be about early programs. And so schools and colleges are very familiar with processes for these early programs. The early programs have been in existence much longer than the timeline of the FAFSA being moved to an October 1st release date. It used to be released after January 1st, and some older professionals, more experienced professionals may be familiar with that timeline. So some of the schools that have early programs do utilize the CSS profile application, and that's an institutional application that has been released October 1st for a significant number of years. It's possible that some colleges and universities, maybe that got away or changed their use of the profile, may use the profile in this 1 year. I've also been talking with colleagues who already have a shorter institutional questionnaire to collect a modest amount of data that helps complement their information, and they may use that or just expand it slightly in this 1 year. But colleges that need to pivot and make an accommodation for this year will certainly have information on their websites. But the colleges that are using the CSS profile and have substantial institutional funds, they're going to be using, if they've already been using the profile, then they're well equipped to use the profile application to make aid offers during the early action and the early decision timeframes, and offer that information in December as they have been. And what is important for families to remember is that colleges are well aware that financial information is exceptionally important in making an enrollment decision. So either they'll provide that information, in advance of a timeline. With a lot of early action programs, a decision date isn't required until much later into the 2024 year. Anyway, if it is an early decision program that has a response date in early January, those are the schools that are more likely to be using the profile application. So I hope that alleviates some concerns, but we're happy to answer other questions as we get to that point in the presentation.
Thanks, Gail. So I want to spend a little bit of time just doing a little bit of a deep dive into the FAFSA application itself, and what you can kind of expect in 24-25, beginning in December when it becomes available. One of the things that I think you would notice right off the bat is that the entire experience and the look and feel will be different. In addition to the mandated changes that the Department of Ed is required to make with the FAFSA questions, they're also spending a lot of time just changing the experience for students so that it is a little bit easier for them. So for example, they have an onboarding section in the beginning with some quick hit videos and high level information to help orient students and parents to what the FAFSA is and what the process will be after they submit the FAFSA, so they kind of know what they're doing, and not just knowing, oh, I need to file the FAFSA. They kind of understand what it actually is and what the next steps would be for them. Some other big changes include how income will be treated. So Ken had already kind of alluded to the change from the data retrieval tool to this direct data exchange. And basically the difference is it cuts the family out of having to transmit information from the IRS to the Department of Ed. So they will be providing consent right from the beginning of the FAFSA for the Department of Ed to receive information about their federal taxpayer information directly from the IRS. So this basically means that for many students, most students, they won't be presented with income questions. That will all be kind of transmitting behind the scenes. And that's a huge change. I think for a lot of families, that's the biggest burden of the FAFSA, is having to pull out a tax return and look at line 18 and what is an IRA payment and all these questions. All that really should be much more simplified for families. So that's a huge win. Additionally, I'll say currently there are criteria that would exempt parents from having to answer asset questions on the FAFSA, and now that criteria is expanding. So more applicants than before, beginning in 24-25, won't have to answer asset questions, and therefore their asset information won't even be considered in their aid eligibility. So this would be families who receive federal benefits like free or reduced lunch or SNAP, parents whose income fall below $60,000 and they file a simplified return. They don't have kind of complicated business returns or things like that. So that's much more generous than the current state. And so more families, again, will not have to answer those asset questions, which is a huge benefit. One change that's, let me see where we are. One change that's coming is that for parents in the situation of divorced and separated households, there's now a different set of criteria to determine which parent needs to be on the FAFSA. So up through the FAFSA that's currently open, 23-24, the parent on the FAFSA is who the student lives with most of the time. And beginning with 24-25, it will be the parent who provides the most financial support to the student. In the online version of the FAFSA, there is a tool to help families determine this. It's called the Who is My Parent Wizard. Gail was joking that there will be some funny memes that come out about this, Who is My Parent Wizard? But it does walk the student through determining which parent would be on the FAFSA and which parent they will then invite to complete their portion of the FAFSA. As another thing to just be aware of as a change is each parent will need a unique, each contributor will need a unique email address and need to log in to provide consent. So just to back up and talk a little bit more broadly about the consent piece, in order for federal tax information to be accessed by the Department of Ed from the IRS, every contributor, and contributor is a new term, and that just means anyone who has to complete a portion of the FAFSA. Every contributor needs to create an FSA ID and provide consent on the FAFSA. And in order to create an FSA ID, you need a unique email address. There are probably some questions about that, but I just want to focus right now on the email address portion. Currently, only students are required to have an FSA ID and email address. And we know that all students have email addresses. That's not an issue. And we know many parents also have email addresses because they email you, they email us. We know that. But there are, of course, groups of students for which this could be a little bit of a barrier. Thinking about parents of first-generation students, parents with limited access to technology, this could require a little bit more hand-holding or a little bit more assistance. So in those cases, they will need an email address. I'll also say in the case of parents who are married but file separate tax returns, both parents would need to create an FSA ID, which would require a unique email address. At my institution at Northeastern, we are connecting with our centers on campus that work with first-generation students. We have a student group that's first-generation students, and we've been connecting with those groups to let them know that these changes are happening, and they can be aware that their parents will need unique email addresses. But with that said, once the FSA ID is created and every contributor has provided consent, the rest of the process should be much smoother than it has been in the past. Another change.
And actually, Mika, we have a question. I think it fits right here for an answer for you. Will parents need a social security number to create an FSA ID? And if so, will they still have the option to print and sign? So you might want to address that. Yeah,
that's a great question. We know that parents do not need a social security number in order to create an FSA ID. However, how that FSA ID is ultimately verified and created, we are still waiting on guidance from the Department of Ed on how their identity will be verified. So that is still an open question, but we know that there will be a process for parents who do not have an FSA ID or do not have a social security number in order to create an FSA ID.
Thank you.
And Mika, I think we probably also just want to, clarify the other half of that question was also, will families be able to, print and sign, and that is still being worked out. But I think that generally speaking, they would not, be able to sign in paper, and a financial aid administrator is not, able to process that signature on their behalf. So there are still changes coming. There will be authentication components for the FSA ID that are similar to what the credit bureaus use to authenticate individuals, and kind of how all that fleshes out for individuals that have information and don't have information is still being finalized.
I see another question. I'm just going to address it really quickly now because I did kind of gloss over this piece. Who needs an FSA ID? So if parents are married and they file together, only one parent needs an FSA ID because they share that federal taxpayer information. If parents are married and file separately, then both parents need an FSA ID. In the situation of a separated or divorced parent, you would look at which parent provides the most financial support, and that is the parent who would create an FSA-ID. I think I've covered all scenarios. Correct me if I haven't.
The only thing is
Thank
they
you.
are saying, you know what, it's almost best that every parent like gets an FSA ID just to have it. That's kind of the suggestion in case, but you're spot on with who needs it.
To move on to some of the other changes on the application, family size, kind of in the spirit of simplifying the FAFSA and making it a better experience for students, family size will now be based on dependents claimed on the tax return. So that information, again, will be pulled directly from the IRS. However, we know that tax returns are from 2 years prior, and family situations can change, and who you claim on a tax return may be different than who's actually in your household for the upcoming academic year. So the department, from what we've heard, will be providing a way for families to create a correction on the FAFSA. What that actually looks like, we're still waiting for guidance on, but there will be a way for families to make that correction.
Thank you.
There will also be some new questions added around the student's race and gender. If you've seen on the current FAFSA that's open now, the 23-24 FAFSA, there is an optional race, ethnicity, and gender demographic survey that populates at the sign and submit page of the FAFSA. That is optional. It's new with 23-24 that the department was chose to put on the FAFSA. Beginning with 24-25, these questions will be mandatory per the legislation, and they will be asked kind of earlier on in the FAFSA experience. I think there are 3 big things to know about this. The first is that while they are mandatory questions and that students have to select an answer, there is an option of prefer not to answer. So if there are student concerns about that question, that is an option for them. And at least that's what it shows in the current draft form that we have. And I expect that that will be the case on the final version of the FAFSA. Second big thing to know is that responses to these questions have no bearing on aid eligibility, have 0 impact. So if students are concerned about how they would answer these questions and what that means for their aid, there's no correlation. This information is used purely by the Department of Education for their own research purposes. And that leads to the third big thing, which is that colleges and universities will not see the answers to these questions. So that is a kind of big piece of reassurance that I know on our campus, we are going to be pushing information out to students. We'll have a web page that kind of describes some of the FAFSA simplification changes and really emphasizes this piece that we will not see the answers to these questions. We've also reached out to our cultural life centers, our LGBTQA center, so they can kind of spread the word within the groups of students that they work with regularly. Another positive change is this new status that's being added called provisional independent student status. So what that means is if a student falls under an unusual circumstance, which is they are considered to be a dependent student, but are unable to provide parental information. Some examples, and the FAFSA lists out a couple examples of this, would be they were in an abusive or threatening environment with their parents, or they have refugee status and have been separated from parents. Parents are incarcerated. They are experiencing homelessness and are self-supporting. Those are some examples where a student may not be able to provide parental information. They'll be able to indicate that on the FAFSA, and then they will have provisional independent student status. And that means that they can continue completing the FAFSA and submit it. Pell eligibility will be calculated. A student aid index, which is the new term for EFC, or expected family contribution, a student aid index would be calculated. And then the college would be required to make contact with the student and make a final determination on whether they can be considered independent within a specific time frame. So this is a much more positive experience than what has been in the past, which students can't provide parental information, they get a rejected FAFSA. No expected family contribution is calculated. Schools would still have to make that determination, but it's just not a very pleasant experience for the student who's already experiencing some level of hardship. So that's, I think, a positive change. Another positive change is that beginning with 23-24, once an independent determination is made because of an unusual circumstance, because of homelessness, because of those types of situations, that independent status is carried on year to year without this student having to reconfirm that with the college. So that's a new and positive change. Couple quick ones at the end here. 529 plans beginning in 24-25 will only need to be reported on the FAFSA if they were intended for the student who's filing the FAFSA. So if parents have college saving plans in other siblings' names or other household members' names, they don't need to be reported on the FAFSA. So that's a big win. Lastly, the FAFSA will be available in 11 different languages, so much more accessible. Really, the emphasis is on removing those types of barriers. And
Thank
I will
you.
pass it on to Amy, I believe is next.
And I'll just let everyone know we are going to get to all of your questions, so no worries, but we're going to keep going for a moment. Thanks.
Okay. So as you just heard, there's a terminology change. So we're very used to that wonderful term, expected family contribution, which quite honestly, when you say that to a family, every time I did a presentation, I always kind of gave a little explanation that this isn't really an accurate figure in the way that it's described. And so really, it's a way to determine a student's eligibility, right? And so by changing the term to student aid index, it's trying to account for that as being more realistic to what this term is. It's still really this. I remember when this first came out, it was like, oh my God, the EFC is going to be gone. Well, no, it's really replaced with something else. But when you think about cost of attendance minus EFC is eligibility, that formula still exists, but we're replacing EFC with that SAI. I drew the short straw, so I will be talking about the number of students in college no longer being part of the formula, and you know, at the bottom end of the EFC, it would, you know, for 2 in college, kind of cut that EFC in half, so that will no longer be in play. And I'll give a little more detail on that in the next slide. But it is still going to be a question that is asked on the FAFSA form, and institutions will receive that information, but it is no longer part of the formula. And I feel like in so many, you know, news stories and things like that, that is like the leading. This is really changing things when I think all of us on this panel will say that I think the good with all of these changes outweighs, you know, just really a few of the things that will be difficult for some families. And then simple needs test. I'm not sure how many school counselors, you know that term specifically, but it will be changed a little bit, and as was noted, expanded a bit. So I think it's applicants exempt from asset reporting is how that will be termed. So let's go on to the fun slide of the day with the removing number in college. And what I think is really important is to understand kind of the background, right, or the rationale for this. And so really, this is being rooted in simplification and equity, which you see here on the slide. And in no way was it a goal of anyone in the department or anywhere to, you know, have families pay more, right, who have multiple children in college at the same time. It really is around this first bullet point under simplification, is trying to find a way to have a simple lookup table so that students and families can have a sense of what a Pell Grant is, and having that number in college as part of the formula makes that difficult. And I think if I remember correctly, it was Senator Alexander who for a number of years was trying to push for, I mean, he was even pushing for a 2-question FAFSA, which really would have been, I don't even know how that would be possible, but This has been a process of trying to get to a place where we're helping families, and particularly, we have to remember that the students and families that really need that Pell Grant, and also being able to expand that. Verification. So my hope is that we see very few verifications through the Department of Ed. I was hoping it would go away altogether, but they've said, well, maybe it's going to look different, right? But we won't have to verify a number in college. And then hopefully on the institutional side, there are some institutions that have their own institutional sibling verification form where they want that signed off like by the registrar's office. And so hopefully that is going to go away. I suppose it depends if some institutions might use siblings as part of their own institutional formula. But the hope is that that kind of burden will go away. And then there's allowances against income when we're kind of determining eligibility through what we call needs analysis formula. And so when we get rid of that number in college, as if we've decided that we haven't, when that has been removed, it helps actually with some kind of rocky transitions when families move out of having someone in college and then they don't. So some of those income allowances will be evened out, as well as I know that sometimes you have conversations with families where they have one in school, two in school, and then all of a sudden they have one in school, and it's like, oh my goodness. How can I possibly, pay this? On the equity side, I would say, like, was it fair to begin with, right? So I think of in my own family, I have a sister and brother-in-law who have 5 children who are 3 to 4 years apart, and some maybe 5. And so do they have more funding because their kids are spaced out more that they can pay the full, EFC each year? No, than someone who happens to have them in at the same time. So we think of equity in that way. That's kind of a lens that you can look at this. And then this last bullet point here, colleges still have, professional judgment or their own institutional funds that they're working with, right? And I think, the important lens to keep on in all of this is that the goal is to help, the neediest students. And most students who are eligible for a Pell Grant, like the large majority of students, when they have one in school, they're still eligible for a Pell Grant, right? So that this change is still for that population that the federal government is looking to help, is still going to be supporting them.
Thank you.
Thanks,
That was a good
Amy.
segue, Gail. Right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the most important part of the change here is to increase access to higher education and make sure that students who need the funds the most are getting it. So what the Student Aid Index, primarily does is identify ways to designate those important federal resources to students. And the number of students that are going to increase for a federal Pell Grant is going to increase. And it's going to increase quite significantly. So you may be familiar with, families that had $40,000 to $50,000 of income were qualifying for the federal Pell Grant. And those incomes and eligibility for the federal Pell Grant are going to increase. So if students have already in the past been eligible for the federal Pell Grant, they're broadly nationwide, not going to see significant changes. There may be some increases in eligibility, and then there will be more students who qualify. So the negative impact, specifically to students that were already qualifying for the federal Pell Grant, and due to the formulaic changes, no longer become eligible is a small percentage of students overall. Eligibility for institutional funds is really a whole different discussion, but focusing on Pell, more students will be eligible. Independent students are mostly unaffected because they were already largely eligible for the federal Pell Grant based on their income. And while the more students, because of the increase in the income that will exempt families from reporting assets is higher, there are some limitations on the kind and amount of income. So families that have schedules like a business schedule and have larger amounts of income or larger losses of income and more complexity to their financial situation, they may still need to report their assets.
And then I don't know if we decided who wanted to take this, but it sort of came out in our discussions, right? That these were two big pieces that we really are looking for further clarification on. So whoever would like to talk a little more about that and learning about that and passing it along.
I know that there have been some questions, already, especially as it relates to the changing definition of parents. And those are things that I think the most important thing is that the Department of Education is providing, is just starting to distribute trainings and resources and really paying attention to those resources throughout the summer and into the fall. They will be releasing clarifications. The FAFSA form itself, the paper version of the FAFSA, a draft version of that has been released once, but what happens in the process is that financial aid administrators and others comment extensively on what they're seeing in that draft version. And then the department reads all those comments, and I can promise you that there's a lot of commenting going on, a lot of feedback. And so then the department will revise, they'll take all that feedback into consideration. They will revise the FAFSA again, the paper version, as well as how it applies to the online experience. And then they'll release it again. That second version is expected probably in July, before the FAFSA form really becomes finalized. And so a lot of the comments are things like providing more clarification and detail to families so that they are clear on the circumstances under which they are reporting information, and those types of situations.
And then on this slide, Ken, I know you shared with us just that strong commitment that you have as an institution to have really good communication with your applicants about all of this. So I don't know if you want to talk about that and then all of these other resources that will be available for counselors and for families.
Yeah, and my colleagues can certainly piggyback. I think where colleges and universities are at right now is in a phase of developing communication. As I mentioned earlier, that runway is shorter for 1 year. What does that mean? What does that mean for the financial aid application process? What does it mean for the admission process? Gail touched on, some schools are looking to collect information a little early in a different way so that they can go out with some type of estimate or preliminary type of an award. But at the end of the day, the shorter runway for 1 year is really the only downside that I see for families, and that that we will at the school level, at the MEFA level, at the state level, I think at the professional association levels, we'll be going out with lots of communication after the summer, as wrinkles get ironed out, as questions get answered, and as information is more readily available. To Gail's point, the feedback on that first draft of that FAFSA I do not envy the folks that need to read all of those comments from the financial aid community. But it's an iterative process that is seeking to make it as good and the best that it can be for families, again, under that umbrella of simplification. Department of Ed has trainings all summer for us. There's a FAFSA roadmap. You can go to studentaid.gov and learn more. But suffice it to say, we are all learning this together, and communication is ongoing.
Can I just throw in something to that, which is all of you on this, webinar, I think, play a really important role in helping our students and families who will be applying to feel the least amount of stress as possible, right? Because we know that this is such a stressful process already. Forget throwing all of this into it. And so to help provide that guidance of, things will be okay. You'll be able to apply. And like institutions aren't looking to kind of, make crazy changes or pull funding away. We've been through things where the FAFSA wasn't even able to be completed until January 1st, right? So there's history there. And so I think just trying not to put any of our own anxiety with the details that still need to be figured out, but just being that kind of calming presence that you already are to students, and to just continue that. I just kind of want to throw that out there.
Great. So I think we have some questions. I don't know if Sean, you want to start asking a few, and you can all chime in.
Okay, let's start with one on the provisional independent status. What happens if an incoming student has the status and applies to more than one college? What does that process look like?
I guess I would say I'm not equipped to fully answer that because we haven't yet navigated through it. So that's what I would say, but if someone else has a better answer, please.
I know what has been clear is that a school can accept a status that has been determined for a student as independent, previously. The question is obviously addressing a simultaneous situation, and my first reaction, although I support and agree with Amy that there will be all kinds of guidance as this comes out. But on the front end, I think institutions have to make a decision based on their school practices and policies. I've heard that some schools may be looking at processes to collect information that allows a student to share why they feel they meet the criteria for an independent as an independent student. Other schools may be using more of an interview type process. But what is required of schools is that they're promoting the opportunity for students to share both special circumstances and unusual circumstances and help students understand the difference between those things. So visiting schools' websites to see how they are guiding students and what information they're asking for will help in that process.
Okay, the next question, besides more students being eligible for Pell Grants, will the size of the Pell Grants increase?
Yes, that's a great question. The maximum Pell Grant is increasing. There are a significant, 2.7 billion, more dollars that are going to be available to students. So it is increasing all around, and institutions have the ability right now to start modeling out based on their current populations, what that might be for their institution. So some schools are planning in that way to try to wrap their hands around it.
I could just piggyback, Gail, if it's okay with you. So yeah, and that's part of the really good news, right, Sean? Is we've seen significant increases over the last 2 enrollment cycles of the federal Pell Grant, and there's more to come. And if you think about, simplifying this process, and making it feel less daunting, as Amy was talking about earlier, and then really honing in on expanded Pell Grant access, because the federal Pell Grant program is the foundation of the financial aid programs that come out of the federal government. And so significant investments in Pell eligibility, expanded Pell eligibility, easier access to Pell eligibility, those are all positives that are coming out of this simplification process.
I totally agree with everything Ken and Gail had to say. And the one other little piece I'll add too around Pell is now, because it is tied to federal poverty levels, it's not something now that the government has to evaluate and reauthorize and has to be this big negotiation every year. It's now tied to the federal poverty level. And we know as the federal poverty level changes, the Pell Grant will be expanded. So that's a huge win.
And I have to be the depressing voice of the advocate to say it's still not where it was originally created from, right? Where it covered a significant amount of at a public institution. So that max Pell still falls short, particularly at a private institution. So I applaud the the Department of Ed and all the work that has gone into creating more students being eligible, but still where that dollar falls short, institutions are still putting in significant funding. So I just want to make sure that that's understood, that max isn't as if it's jumping up like, a double the amount that it is now. And hopefully someday we'll get there.
That's right. Yet. It's not doubling yet, Amy.
Exactly. I
Okay,
actually
great.
wish I had worn my T-shirt that I got recently that says,
Yeah,
it says
double the
it depends. It depends, right? Because that answer that we all deal with when we talk with students, every institution, right, is still different. That is still staying the same.
Okay, can we talk a little bit about the SAI and its ability to go to negative 1,500 and how a zero SAI, does that mean the same as a zero EFC, and how that process works?
So if you kind of know the formula of cost of attendance minus EFC, now SAI is your financial aid eligibility, and a student can't receive funding above their cost of attendance, right? So even though there's now a negative down to a negative 1,500 SAI, a student can't receive financial aid above that cost of attendance. So in some ways, right, that still acts like a zero, but it's a way to kind of really break out that zero student and that max Pell student, that these students who go down to negative 1,500, they're differentiated from a zero. And institutions could potentially use that information in the awarding of their own institutional funds.
So that may, as Amy says, that may help institutions that maybe can't meet need. They may allocate some resources differently. It also may mean something important for institutions that have other enhanced programs on their campus for eligibility for things. It may be a useful tool to designate and identify students that should have access to even more resources beyond just helping to pay for the bill, but other opportunities or expenses or resources basically on campuses.
We talk a little bit about a student who is a U.S. citizen, but their parents are not U.S. citizens and live and earn income abroad. how are they going to report their income via this new process?
I can jump in and my colleagues can keep me honest. I know that there will be some limited circumstances in which families may have to manually enter income information. I don't know if this is one of those circumstances. The department hasn't provided clear guidance yet around parents who have foreign income or foreign tax returns. My suspicion, and this is just Nika Lim, not anyone else, saying this, my suspicion is that it may end up being a manual input. So there might be certain caveats of students who will have to manually input information because the department simply cannot retrieve that information through the IRS, but still waiting on guidance. That's definitely been a question that we have put out to the Department of Ed, and our professional associations have put out. So we're waiting for guidance there.
And I think it can't probably be repeated enough that what we have all said here is that the changes in the FAFSA are about simplifying the experience for the majority of students. And there are always going to be outliers and families that have special circumstances. This is not about excluding them from the process. They will have avenues to still apply for aid and report information that may fall outside of our IRS system, or other, whether you're a non-tax filer, that is completely normal. Those students those families largely are going to qualify for the maximum Pell anyway. But to the extent that information, does need to be collected, there will be ways to do that.
Next question. So in the past, for students that were continuing on in the college process, there was a renewal process where information was pulled from one year to another. Is this going to be continued with the new FAFSA simplification process, especially in this first year of the process?
I don't know an answer to that, but I mean, it was only really basic demographic information that was pulled forward. So, I mean, could they do that? Perhaps, but with all of the changes, with the FSA ID and consent, like I'm not really sure how that would work.
One thing that we were told about the FSA ID is that because families are, contributors providing consent, and that is tied to their FSA ID, if a parent has to file the FAFSA for multiple children, that would kind of automatically be tied to their FSA ID. Same if they were filing the FAFSA for themselves, that information, kind of sticks with their FSA ID. So that's a kind of helpful thing. Once they provide that consent, that does carry. Whether it carries from year to year, that we're still waiting for some answers on.
The consent definitely doesn't carry from year to year. So perhaps, that might be a way to answer the question. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of things that need to be refreshed in this process. Schools are also going to have to sort of recertify or reaffirm their agreements to some of these structural changes. So that's why I would not be surprised if there's sort of a clean break here with the new system.
And we have a question on, does the Simplification Act include anything about simplifying or standardizing award letters?
That's a great question. There is not anything yet about simplifying award letters in the Simplification Act. There still are many initiatives to create standardization and encourage schools to use resources that are out there. And so I do think that work will continue. There are other working groups and task forces that are, looking to encourage that, helping schools to provide better information for students. So it's definitely still a strong and important topic to keep moving forward.
Well, that is a related, not directly, around award offers, but there is now a little bit more required standardization in how schools present cost information on their websites. So that is a helpful thing in enabling a family to sort of easily compare costs between schools. And essentially the provision is that when schools provide tuition and fee information, they must also include other cost of attendance information. So that really helps in providing the full view of what the cost of an education could be at a school, the type of aid you could be eligible for, up to if you are a high need student. So that, I think, is a positive change with the FAFSA Simplification Act.
And no longer using room and board, which always felt like a confusing term, using living expenses.
We have a couple of questions on how to determine who is the contributor, who's contributing more than 50% of the expenses of the support for students. I know that this is something that we're still waiting for some details on, but can we provide a little more guidance on how that process is going to work?
I mean, I in some ways, I feel like the same question we would handle, doing presentations at high schools with families, who is the parent? Well, who does the child live with more? And then it's, well, who provides more support? And then it's like, well, but, and so I think here, they're starting with who provides more support. And I know that there's there's a whole different host of ways that support is provided, and whether it's child support, and we kind of had that on a slide, how the department is going to really kind of clarify. And I think in some ways it comes down to like, is this somehow monitored by pulling tax data? And maybe that's where parents kind of, try to get down to that too, but it's in the old world, it really was left up to the parent to determine that who is the parent based on this criteria. I think it will be interesting to see how the department works to clarify that, because I think, again, sometimes that was really a hard sticking point, but we need better clarity, and and I think even when this first came out and that was what it was, that's what was changing. And then all of a sudden we got this clarification on, oh, but we're going to pull household size on tax return, which, for some of those divorced parents who switch that back and forth, and still we're kind of trying to get more clarity on that. So these are things that need more information.
Yeah, so we can safely say we will, one of the future trainings will probably be a whole discussion about that once we have more information. And I know it's 3 o'clock, but there are a couple more questions. So maybe we'll go through a couple more and go from there. We'll just finish these off. Yeah.
Okay, and the reason for the delay to the FAFSA release is to get the FAFSA put together. I know that what I've heard so far is that one of the big things they're looking at, one of the big reasons for the delay, is to make sure that all of the data coming from the IRS is secure and that families won't have to worry about having this information shared between systems. They're making sure that everything is very secure in order to do that. And as Gail and Amy, all of you have mentioned earlier, that all of the information that they're going through with the different iterations of the FAFSA and the comments to look at to make sure that everything looks good to all of the constituencies involved, I think is one of the other reasons for the delay. Is there anything else that we should touch upon there? Okay, and then has there been any confirmation on whether or not a contributor will be able to start the FAFSA before the student starts that with their FSA ID?
Yes, I think I was typing that in right as you were asking it. But yes, a parent can begin the FAFSA or the student can begin the FAFSA. Both pathways are available. If a student is completing the FAFSA first, then they would select which parent would need to complete their portion, input an email address. That parent will get an invitation to complete their portion of the FAFSA. And now that information is separated, so the student will not see the parent's portion of the FAFSA and the parent will not see the student's portion of the FAFSA. That federal tax information and their kind of personal information, that is all kind of treated separately. But yes, the parent can begin the FAFSA before the student can.
And do we know if the College Board is going to be changing the CSS profile process to more align with the new FAFSA process?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. If it's about sort of the methodology, then I could say that there are no changes to the institutional methodology this year. I think we do need to just clarify where some of those distinctions are, especially with regard to reporting assets and 529 plans. And that's really where the FAFSA is serving two different purposes. It's serving the purpose of determining eligibility for the federal Pell Grant, and then it's also being used to determine a family's ability to contribute to educational costs for those institutions that have institutional funds. And institutions that have significant institutional funds need even greater differentiation. And so that's why the profile is valuable. But I think those institutions are going to continue to collect the information on the profile, determine their eligibility, and then award the federal funds based on the FAFSA. Schools that are in the middle, they may be very hard pressed to manage during this time, and there's a lot of conversation in the community as well to help them navigate these many months. They're going to be a bit busy. Campuses are going to be a busy place for a while, and the springtime with aid decisions going out and enrollment decisions being made, it will be a very, very busy time, but we'll be ready for it.
And the final question, for non-filers that when they're going through this new process, they receive the value that they're non-tax filer. Do they then have the opportunity to input data manually about their income? How does that work? Do we know any information about that yet?
So non-filers, I believe it's an auto negative 1,500 for them. And in the law, it was written that, the income data is only going to come off a tax return. So if they're a non-filer, there's not data that they would need to be inputting, and they would generate an auto negative 1,500. I almost said EFC. SAI.
We're gonna have to clean up that language.
It's like when the year switches, and you're still writing it down.
Well, I want to thank all of you for sharing all of your knowledge. And I don't know if we said this at the beginning, about a couple of you are really connected to some national committees on some of this. So you're hearing this information as soon as it becomes more clear. So I know you'll be sharing that with us and with the counseling community as well. And I want to thank everyone else. These were terrific questions and clearly very hitting on a lot of the important changes and how those are going to affect the families. So thank you. I guess I can just leave it by saying, I'll just say more to come. Stay in touch and we will continue these trainings. But I will ask if any of the panelists have any final words to share for counselors as they hopefully get ready to head off for the summer and enjoy the summer a little bit.
My parting words are remain calm.
That's good. How can you beat that?
And
All
enjoy
right,
the
well-
summer. I'm hoping when you get back, we'll have a lot more information. So things should be in a lot more clear when you come back. So enjoy the summer.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
That was fun. So take vacations this summer, everybody.
Absolutely.
All you can.
Yep. 2 weeks at the Cape. So,
All right. I'm going to close us down. Thank you all.
Right.
Thank you.
all right. Take care.
Thanks.